Let's dive straight into the big question. What was there before Genesis, before the Bible even begins to explain creation? For centuries, we've been handed this idea that before the let there be light moment, there was absolutely nothing. No space, no time, just emptiness. But is that really what happened? I'm not so sure. Now, here's where it gets interesting. If you look beyond the Bible, into ancient myths and even banned texts, you'll find something shocking: the idea that this so-called nothingness wasn't really nothing at all. Think about the Enuma Elish, one of the oldest creation stories from ancient Babylon. In it, before anything was created, there were two primordial gods, Apsu, the god of fresh water, and Tiamat, the goddess of salt water. Their chaotic mix was the origin of everything. So, before creation, there wasn't a peaceful void. There was chaos. Raw, untamed energy swirling in the dark, waiting for something or someone to shape it. Let's bring in the Bible now. In Genesis 1 verse 2, we hear about the Spirit of God hovering over the waters. Wait a second, what waters? The Bible doesn't tell us where these waters came from or why they're already there. It's like we've entered the story mid-scene, and no one bothered to tell us about the setup. What if these waters represent that same kind of chaos we see in the Enuma Elish, a pre-existing force that God has to tame? And not just a blank slate waiting for his touch. Ancient Gnostic texts, banned by the church for being too radical, also throw a wrench in the traditional narrative. They argue that before God as we know him, there was something else, a higher, more abstract existence, Sophia, the embodiment of wisdom, or the monad, the ultimate source of all things. In these texts, Yahweh isn't even the first creator. He's just one layer in a much bigger cosmic story. Maybe Genesis isn't the beginning of everything, but just a tiny chapter in an older, much more complex history. Even if we pull in modern physics for a moment, things get even weirder. Scientists like Stephen Hawking have argued that before the Big Bang, time as we know it didn't exist. But instead of there being nothing, they talk about the quantum vacuum, a seething field of potential energy, not visible, not physical, but very much there. So, before the creation of the universe, could there have been a quantum chaos, something raw and primordial that God had to harness? Now, let's move beyond what happened before creation to a topic that's equally mind-bending. What existed before Adam? We've all been taught that Adam was the first man, the origin point for humanity. The story seems pretty straightforward, right? God creates the earth, breathes life into Adam, and boom, there's the start of humanity. But hold on. There are some huge gaps in that story that nobody really talks about. Gaps that, when you start digging, suggest that maybe Adam wasn't the first human after all. Maybe, just maybe, there was another world, other beings, and an entirely different history before Adam even enters the picture. Let's look at one of the earliest cracks in the traditional narrative, Lilith. Some of you may have heard her name, but for many, she's been scrubbed out of the mainstream version of the Bible. According to Jewish mysticism, particularly in the alphabet of Ben Sira, Lilith was actually Adam's first wife. That's right. Before Eve was even in the picture, there was Lilith. And she didn't take kindly to being considered subservient to Adam. In fact, she left the Garden of Eden because she refused to be dominated. The texts say she fled to the desert, a vague and ominous place where she mixed with demons and became a figure of darkness. But think about this for a second: if Lilith existed before Eve, and she had the same powers and intellect as Adam, what does that say about the timeline of creation? Was there a world where Lilith ruled, or where she and other beings existed outside of Eden? This isn't just an isolated story, either. If you dig into other ancient traditions, particularly Gnostic and Sumerian texts, you start seeing evidence that suggests humanity existed long before Adam was ever created. Take the Gnostics, for example. Their teachings often describe different layers of creation, with Adam being a more recent development in a much older cosmic drama. According to the Gnostics, the demiurge, often identified as Yahweh, was responsible for trapping human souls in material bodies. And Adam? He was part of that entrapment. But before Adam, before the creation of the material world, there were beings of light, pre-Adamic humans, who were far more advanced, spiritual, and free. These beings lived in a different realm, one of higher consciousness, where they were not confined by the limitations of flesh and blood. So, was Adam the first, or just the first in a new, more controlled version of humanity? Now, let's step outside the religious texts for a second and consider the scientific evidence. If you look at fossil records, anthropologists have found remains of humans, or at least human-like beings, that go back hundreds of thousands of years, far earlier than the 6,000-year timeline of the biblical Adam. Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, Denisovans, they all existed long before Adam is said to have walked the earth. And here's the kicker, some of these ancient human species didn't just survive, they thrived. They built tools, created art, and established communities. If they were here before Adam, who were they, and why don't we hear more about them in traditional religious narratives? This brings us to the concept of the pre-Adamites. This theory isn't some fringe idea, it's been around for centuries and even debated among Christian scholars. In the 16th and 17th centuries, theologians like Isaac LaPeria suggested that there were humans before Adam. According to this theory, Adam wasn't the first human but the first Hebrew, or the first in a special line of humanity chosen by God. The pre-Adamites were simply the rest of humanity scattered across the globe, living their lives long before Adam's creation. LaPeria's theory caused such a stir that he was forced to recant under pressure from the Catholic Church. But the question remains, could the Garden of Eden story actually be focused on a specific group of people, leaving out the broader human story? Islam has its own version of a pre-Adamic world. In Islamic tradition, jinn, beings made of smokeless fire, lived on earth long before humans were created. These jinn had free will, just like humans, and according to some accounts, they built civilizations and ruled the planet. But their reign ended in chaos and rebellion, which led God to send an army of angels to put down the uprising. The jinn were then cast out, and only after that was humanity created. Think about that for a second, entire civilizations could have risen and fallen before Adam was even formed from the dust. So, why don't we hear more about this? Why is the story of pre-Adamites, Lilith, or the jinn hidden from the mainstream? The truth is, these narratives challenge the simplicity of the Adam and Eve story. They suggest that humanity, and even life itself, may be far more complex, older, and diverse than traditional teachings allow. Maybe Adam was just one of many iterations of human life, or perhaps he was created to replace an earlier, failed experiment. And when you consider the possibility of a pre-Adamic world, it raises some serious questions about what we think we know about human history. But let's not stop there. Some researchers, particularly in the field of ancient astronaut theory, believe that extraterrestrial beings played a role in shaping pre-Adamic civilizations. The ancient Sumerians, for example, wrote extensively about the Anunnaki, a group of gods who supposedly descended from the heavens and created humans as a slave race to mine gold. The Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki as highly advanced, powerful beings who genetically engineered humanity to serve them. And get this, some researchers suggest that the pre-Adamites could have been these early human hybrids, created by extraterrestrial intervention long before the biblical Adam was even a thought. It's a controversial theory, but when you look at the intricate knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and architecture possessed by ancient civilizations like the Sumerians, Egyptians, and Mayans, it's hard not to wonder, could there have been advanced, pre-Adamic humans guided by something, or someone, not of this world? Here's something that's bound to flip your perspective on reality: time itself may not have always existed. We tend to think of time as this unstoppable, universal force, something that's just always been there. Seconds ticking by, hours turning into days, one event after another, in a neat little sequence. But what if I told you that before the creation of the universe, time didn't even exist? And what if that changes how we understand everything? To get to the bottom of this, we need to unpack one big assumption, that time began with creation. If you look at modern science, it backs this up. Take the Big Bang Theory, for instance, one of the most widely accepted explanations for the origin of the universe. It tells us that about 13.8 billion years ago, there was this incredibly dense, hot point where everything, space, matter, energy, and yes, time, began. But here's where it gets tricky. Before the Big Bang, there was no space, no matter, and crucially, no time. Stephen Hawking and other physicists have argued that time itself is a product of the universe, like a dimension woven into the fabric of space. So before the universe, time as we know it didn't exist. But what does that even mean? If we think back to religious texts, especially the Bible, there's no mention of time being created. It's just there, unspoken, as if it's an unshakable part of the process. But pause for a second, why doesn't Genesis mention God creating time? Why is that left out? It suggests that either the writers didn't fully understand the concept of time's origins, or they simply didn't think it was relevant to the story. But modern science has revealed that this could be one of the most important details. If time had a beginning, then what existed before it? The answer, it seems, is nothing we could even comprehend with our current understanding. In ancient Hindu cosmology, there's a concept known as kalpa, which describes time as cyclical, not linear. In Hinduism, the universe goes through endless cycles of creation, preservation, and destruction. Each cycle spans trillions of years. Time here doesn't begin or end, it just keeps looping. In this view, time isn't something that's born with the universe, it's a continuous force that governs everything in existence. So, in contrast to the Big Bang theory, where time had a start, kalpa suggests it has always existed and will always exist. And that's not just a philosophical idea. Modern physics, specifically theories about the multiverse, have started to flirt with a similar idea, the possibility that our universe is just one of many, and that universes are born and die in an infinite loop. This theory also hints that time might exist differently across different dimensions or realities. The ticking clock, we know, could be a local feature, specific to our universe. In another universe, time might behave in entirely different ways or not exist at all. And this idea lines up with some ancient religious and philosophical thought, suggesting that time is far more fluid than we think. But let's bring it back to something even more mind-blowing. Time may not exist without consciousness. You see, time is deeply tied to how we perceive the world. It's not just an external measurement, like a clock on a wall. It's woven into how we experience reality. In quantum mechanics, there's a concept called the observer effect, where the act of observation can change the outcome of an event. Some scientists have taken this further to suggest that time, too, is subjective, something that only becomes meaningful when there's an observer to measure it. If no one's there to experience time, does it even exist? Ancient mystics and modern physicists have oddly similar things to say about this. The ancient Greek philosopher Parmenides argued that time was an illusion, that the past, present, and future all existed simultaneously and only our minds perceive them as separate. Today, physicists like Carlo Rovelli argue something similar. In the quantum world, events don't happen in a sequence like we think. Time becomes murky, entangled, and non-linear. So, what does all this mean for our understanding of time before creation? Well, it suggests that time itself could be a construct, one that didn't exist until there was something to experience it. Before creation, there was no one, nothing to perceive it. Which begs the question, did time only begin when consciousness did? Was time, in some way, created by the act of creation itself? If so, time is not just an invisible force ticking away in the background, it's something more dynamic, more linked to our very existence. And here's another possibility: if time didn't exist before creation, then neither did cause and effect. This is important because everything we understand about the universe is built on cause and effect. One thing happens, and it leads to another. But without time, there's no cause and no effect. Which means that the moment of creation, whatever that was, wasn't caused by something before it. It just happened. For no reason we can comprehend. This opens up a whole new line of thinking about the nature of existence. The Big Bang, or creation in religious terms, might not have needed a cause in the way we typically think. It might have been spontaneous, a singularity in every sense of the word. The first and only moment. Knowledge is power, that's something we all understand. But what if I told you that from the very beginning, there was a deliberate effort to withhold knowledge from humanity? That from the moment humans were created, someone, or something, decided to keep us in the dark. And we're not just talking about any knowledge here. We're talking about knowledge that could change the entire course of human history, secrets of the universe, the nature of existence, even the truth about who or what we really are. The story of forbidden knowledge is older than any religion we know. And it's not just limited to the Bible. Cultures across the world have been telling stories about the forbidden fruit of knowledge for millennia. Let's start with the most famous one, the Garden of Eden. The traditional narrative is simple: Adam and Eve lived in paradise, completely innocent, until the serpent tricked Eve into eating from the tree of knowledge. But what's really going on here? The tree of knowledge wasn't just any tree, it was a direct symbol of knowledge that was intentionally kept from humanity. Now, why would God create humans with the capacity for curiosity, for learning, and then tell them that there was certain knowledge they shouldn't have? That's a fundamental contradiction. You don't give someone the ability to question everything and then deny them the answers. Unless, of course, the goal wasn't to protect them, but to control them. But what kind of knowledge are we talking about? According to many interpretations, the tree of knowledge represents far more than just the difference between good and evil. It's the knowledge of the universe, how things really work. In the Bible, God says, if you eat from this tree, you will surely die. But here's the thing, Adam and Eve didn't die, at least not in the way we understand it. Instead, their eyes were opened. They became aware of themselves, their surroundings, their limitations. In other words, they gained consciousness, something that set them apart from the rest of creation. So why would that kind of awareness be dangerous? Some scholars and esoteric thinkers argue that the story of Adam and Eve is not about disobedience, it's about humanity's first step toward independence, toward becoming godlike. And that's exactly what the serpent promised Eve, saying, "You will be like God, knowing good and evil." In this light, the serpent isn't the villain, it's the liberator. It's offering humanity the knowledge that was intentionally withheld from them. This theme of forbidden knowledge isn't just a biblical story. It shows up in almost every ancient culture. Take the Greeks, for example. The story of Prometheus is eerily similar. Prometheus, a titan, defied the gods to bring fire, symbolizing knowledge and technology, to humans. For this act, he was brutally punished, chained to a rock where an eagle would eat his liver every day. The message here is the same: those who try to bring knowledge to humanity are met with divine wrath. In ancient Sumerian texts, we find the story of the Anunnaki, a group of gods who supposedly descended from the heavens and created humanity. But the Anunnaki didn't just create humans out of goodwill, they wanted a labor force. According to the texts, they intentionally kept humanity ignorant, using us as workers. But one god, Enki, defied the rest and gave humans knowledge, including the ability to think critically and even the secrets of civilization. Sound familiar? It's another echo of the same theme, knowledge as power, and power being kept from us. Now, what's particularly intriguing is how these stories of forbidden knowledge often revolve around divine beings who rebelled. The serpent, Prometheus, Enki, all of them are depicted as rebels who broke the rules to empower humanity. But what if the narrative we've been fed, that they're the villains, isn't true? What if they were trying to free us from a system designed to keep us ignorant? It raises the question, who benefits from keeping humanity in the dark? And it doesn't stop there. In the Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text that was banned by the early church, we see a group of angels known as the Watchers. These Watchers descended to earth and took human wives, but more importantly, they gave humanity forbidden knowledge: how to make weapons, how to work with metals, and even the secrets of the stars and the moon. For this, they were severely punished by God. But here's the twist: it wasn't the knowledge itself that was the problem, it was the fact that this knowledge gave humans the ability to challenge divine authority. In other words, it made us less controllable. We can see this pattern throughout history. Knowledge has always been seen as dangerous by those in power. Look at the Middle Ages, when the Church restricted access to education, keeping most of the population illiterate. Why? Because if you control knowledge, you control power. You control the narrative. And that's exactly what's happening in these ancient stories. The gods, or whatever higher powers were at play, weren't just protecting humans from knowledge. They were hoarding it, keeping it to themselves to maintain control over us. The implications of this are staggering. If knowledge was deliberately kept from us, then what else don't we know? What secrets have been hidden throughout human history? And what does it mean that some of the earliest stories we have all point to a deliberate effort to control what we're allowed to learn? This isn't just mythology, it's a blueprint for understanding the world we live in today. From religious dogma to political systems to societal norms, we've always been told that certain knowledge is too dangerous, too forbidden. But who decides what's forbidden? And why? So, we've been conditioned to think of creation as this beautiful, orderly event where God speaks and everything just appears. But when we really dig into the details, we find that the creation story, whether from the Bible or countless other ancient texts, doesn't start in a perfect, peaceful void. No, it starts in chaos. And that chaos is a crucial part of the story, something that's often glossed over, or worse, ignored. Why? Let's start with the Bible. Right in the second verse of Genesis, we read, "The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters." Wait, what waters? We're 2 verses into the Bible, and there's already something there. Before God says, "Let there be light," there's this chaotic, watery darkness. No one told us where it came from or why it's there, it just is. And that's important because it suggests that creation wasn't about God forming something out of nothing. It was about God bringing order to chaos, about shaping an already existing primordial force that was unruly, untamed, and frankly, terrifying. But this isn't just a biblical concept. Ancient cultures all over the world have their own versions of creation out of chaos. Take the Enuma Elish, one of the oldest creation stories from Mesopotamia. In it, there's no void at the beginning. Instead, there are 2 primordial gods, Apsu and Tiamat, representing fresh water and salt water. These chaotic, swirling waters collide, and it's from this collision that the gods and the world are eventually born. But here's the key part, it wasn't a peaceful creation. It was violent. Marduk, the hero god, had to battle and defeat Tiamat, the embodiment of chaos, before he could form the heavens and the earth. Creation was literally born out of war. What's fascinating is that this theme of water as chaos, this primeval force, isn't limited to Mesopotamia or the Bible. You find it in ancient Egypt, too. Their creation story speaks of Nun, the chaotic waters of the abyss, out of which the god Atum rises to bring light and order to the cosmos. The ancient Greeks had something similar with Oceanus, the river that encircles the world, representing the chaotic, untamed edge of existence. Over and over, these ancient stories emphasize that before there was order, there was disorder. Before there was structure, there was chaos. But why water? Why is this element the recurring symbol of chaos in so many ancient stories? Think about it, water is both life-giving and destructive. It nourishes crops, sustains life, but it can also flood, drown, and destroy. In ancient times, people lived close to nature, and they understood this duality intimately. Water was unpredictable, and in many ways, it still is. It represents the uncontrollable aspects of existence, the things we can't predict, can't harness, can't fully understand. Now, bring that back to the idea of creation. If creation didn't start from a peaceful, empty void, but instead emerged from a chaotic, dark, watery abyss, what does that tell us about the nature of our universe? Is chaos not just a part of creation, but the very foundation of it? And what does that say about God, or gods, who had to bring order to it? In the Canaanite myth of Baal, we see something eerily similar to the Mesopotamian battle between Marduk and Tiamat. Baal, the storm god, has to defeat Yam, the sea god, who embodies the chaotic forces of the ocean. Once Baal wins, he establishes his rule and brings order to the world. So, across cultures, creation isn't this peaceful, orderly event. It's the result of divine beings battling the forces of chaos, wresting control from the primordial waters. And this idea didn't just disappear. It evolved. In modern physics, we have concepts like entropy, the natural tendency of systems to move toward disorder. In a way, the universe is still fighting against chaos. Stars form from collapsing clouds of gas, but eventually they explode in supernovae, scattering chaos across space. Black holes devour everything around them. On a cosmic level, we see the push and pull between order and disorder constantly playing out, just like in these ancient myths. But let's focus back on the biblical narrative for a second. In Genesis, God doesn't eliminate the chaos. He controls it. After he creates the world, the waters are pushed to the edges, the seas and oceans, confined, but not gone. And if you read further into the Bible, chaos, particularly watery chaos, keeps popping back up. The story of Noah and the flood? Chaos unleashed once again. The Red Sea? God parts the waters, controlling chaos to save his people. Even in the book of Revelation, when describing the new heavens and new earth, it says, "There will be no more sea." Why? Because the sea, the water, represents chaos. It's the thing God has to keep under control. And in the final act of creation, chaos is finally, fully vanquished. We're often told that the universe was born from a singular, peaceful act of divine will. But what if I told you that creation didn't just happen? What if, instead, it was the result of a cosmic war, a battle of unimaginable forces that tore through the fabric of reality before the world as we know it could even begin? Because that's exactly what ancient cultures believed. In fact, in many myths, creation wasn't about harmony. It was about power, conflict, and the ultimate conquest of chaos. And once you start seeing it that way, the entire story of existence changes. Let's start with one of the oldest and most famous creation myths, the Enuma Elish. It's from ancient Mesopotamia, predating the Bible by centuries. In this story, there isn't a serene god hovering over the waters. Instead, there are two primordial deities, Apsu and Tiamat, representing fresh water and salt water, chaos and the abyss. These forces weren't passive. They were active, swirling together, creating the gods themselves. But soon enough, conflict arises. Tiamat, the goddess of the saltwater abyss, is furious. The younger gods are disturbing the peace of the primordial waters, so she decides to destroy them. Enter Marduk, a younger god who steps up to challenge her. The battle that ensues is nothing short of epic. Marduk defeats Tiamat in a violent clash, splitting her body in two. From her remains, he creates the heavens and the earth. Creation isn't born out of peace, it's carved out of the destruction of a goddess, a cosmic battle between order and chaos. Right there, in one of humanity's oldest stories, creation is a product of war. But Mesopotamia wasn't alone in this kind of thinking. Jump to ancient Greece, and you've got the Titanomachy, the war between the Olympian gods and the Titans. According to this myth, before Zeus and the Olympian gods could rule the cosmos, they had to overthrow the Titans, an older race of divine beings. And it wasn't an easy fight. The Titans were powerful, controlling the forces of nature, time, and the heavens themselves. But Zeus and his siblings, armed with lightning and divine fury, fought for 10 long years. In the end, they won, casting the Titans into Tartarus, a deep abyss of punishment and chaos. Here again, order doesn't emerge from nothing, it's forged in the fires of divine conflict. What's interesting is how this theme repeats across cultures. Look at Norse mythology, where the gods, led by Odin, battle the primordial giants in a violent struggle before they can create the world. Even after creation, the gods remain locked in conflict with chaos, knowing that one day Ragnarok, the final battle, will come, and the world will end in flames. Creation and destruction, war and rebirth, they're intertwined. You might be thinking, well, these are just myths. They don't have anything to do with the Bible, right? Not so fast. There's actually a hidden layer in the Bible that echoes these same themes of divine conflict. In the book of Isaiah, we find references to Leviathan, the twisting serpent of the sea, a creature of chaos. And what does God do? He defeats Leviathan. The Psalms even describe how God crushed the heads of Leviathan and gave him as food to the creatures of the desert. It should, because this is the same story told in different words, God defeating a monstrous force of chaos to assert divine order. It doesn't stop there. In the book of Revelation, we see a final cosmic battle where God must once again defeat the forces of chaos and evil before establishing the new heavens and the new earth. Creation, it seems, is a cycle of conflict, with chaos never fully vanquished, just kept at bay for a time. Even in Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah tells of a time before creation when divine vessels, filled with the light of God, shattered. This event, known as the Shevirat HaKelim, represents a cosmic catastrophe, the breaking of divine order from which the material world is formed. The remnants of those broken vessels are scattered throughout the universe, a reminder that creation is, at its core, born from conflict and fracture. So why is this idea of creation through conflict so universal? Why do so many cultures, separated by time and geography, share the same story of divine war? Here's the thing, it reflects a fundamental truth about existence. Creation, whether we're talking about the universe, societies, or even personal growth, never comes without struggle. It's never a smooth, easy process. There's always a battle to be fought, a force of chaos to be tamed. And maybe that's what these ancient myths were trying to tell us. There's a deeper, unsettling truth in all this. If creation was born out of violence, out of war, does that mean that chaos is still lurking, waiting to reclaim what was taken from it? Many of these myths suggest exactly that. They tell us that while the forces of order may have won the battle, the war isn't over. The gods didn't destroy chaos, they contained it. It's still there, at the edges of reality, waiting for its chance to rise again. And isn't that exactly what we see in the world today? Even after millennia of civilization, we still live on the edge of chaos. Natural disasters, wars, social upheavals, they're all reminders that chaos is never far away. It's not gone. It's just waiting. Here's a question that challenges everything you think you know about creation. Was Yahweh, the God of the Bible, actually the ultimate creator? For most people, that's a hard no. The Bible tells us Yahweh is the all-powerful, all-knowing creator of the universe. But what if I told you that some ancient texts and esoteric traditions paint a much more complex picture? In these accounts, Yahweh isn't the highest, most powerful being. Instead, he's something else, a demiurge, a lower creator who shaped the material world, but is not the ultimate force behind everything. Let's break this down. The word demiurge comes from ancient Greek philosophy, and it means craftsman or artisan. In the writings of Plato, the demiurge was a creator of the physical world, but he wasn't perfect. He didn't create from nothing, and he didn't create the ideal world, he shaped the material one, the one we live in, full of imperfection, suffering, and chaos. Sound familiar? It should, because this idea lines up with certain Gnostic texts that question whether the God of the Bible is truly the highest authority or if he's just a builder of a flawed, material reality. In the Gnostic tradition, Yahweh isn't the supreme being. In fact, they call him the demiurge, and they say he's responsible for trapping human souls in the material world. According to Gnosticism, the true, ultimate God exists beyond the physical universe, pure spirit, pure goodness. Yahweh, on the other hand, is a lower deity who crafted the material realm, a realm filled with suffering and limitations. And here's the kicker, Yahweh himself doesn't know that he's not the highest God. He's convinced that he's the only one. That's why, in the Old Testament, he constantly demands loyalty, worship, and obedience. He believes he's the beginning and the end. But the Gnostics suggest he's wrong, that he's blind to the higher realms of reality. Now, you might be thinking, wait, how could this even be possible? We've always been told that Yahweh is the one true God. But these ancient Gnostic texts, like the Apocryphon of John or the Nag Hammadi scriptures, paint a very different picture. According to them, the true, unknowable God, often referred to as the monad, exists far beyond the demiurge, in a realm of pure spirit and light. The demiurge, on the other hand, is a lesser being who created the physical world, but did so with ignorance. And when you start to view the Old Testament through this lens, things take on a whole new meaning. Look at Genesis again. Yahweh creates the heavens and the earth, but it's clear that this creation is imperfect. There's suffering, temptation, sin, and death. This isn't the ideal world you'd expect from an all-powerful, all-loving creator, right? But it makes sense if Yahweh isn't the highest God. If he's a demiurge, then creation would reflect his limitations. The material world is flawed because the one who created it is flawed, or at the very least, limited. What's even more interesting is how the Gnostic texts describe Yahweh's reaction to humans gaining knowledge. When Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge, what's Yahweh's response? He punishes them. He casts them out of the Garden of Eden. But why? If knowledge is power, why would a loving God punish humans for seeking it? The Gnostics argue that Yahweh didn't want humans to gain the knowledge that could free them from the material world. The demiurge wants to keep humanity trapped in ignorance, bound to the physical plane, under his control. This also explains why there's such a sharp distinction between the Old Testament Yahweh and the New Testament depiction of Jesus. In Gnosticism, Jesus isn't just the son of the demiurge, he's a messenger from the higher, true God, sent to bring knowledge, gnosis, that can liberate humanity from the material world. Jesus comes to awaken humanity to the reality that they are spiritual beings trapped in a physical body, imprisoned in a world created by a lower God who doesn't even know he's not the top of the cosmic hierarchy. The crucifixion, in this view, isn't just about salvation from sin, it's a way to break free from the demiurge's control and reconnect with the ultimate, spiritual God beyond the physical realm. If Yahweh is the demiurge, and the physical world is flawed because it was created by him, then what does that mean for how we view the world around us? Is the suffering we see, war, disease, death, just the natural result of a material world created by a being who isn't perfect? And if so, what's the way out? The Gnostics believed that the only path to freedom was through gnosis, or direct spiritual knowledge. Not faith, not obedience, but inner knowledge that transcends the physical, material world. What's remarkable is how this idea lines up with so many other spiritual traditions. Think about Buddhism, where the material world is seen as an illusion, Maya, and enlightenment is about breaking free from this illusion to reach nirvana, a state beyond suffering and beyond the physical. Or consider Hinduism, where the soul, Atman, is trapped in the cycle of birth and death, bound to the material world by ignorance, and must seek liberation, moksha, to reunite with the ultimate reality, Brahman. Across cultures, across centuries, we see this recurring theme: the material world is not the ultimate truth. It's a prison, a trap, a flawed creation. And the only way out is through knowledge, through understanding that there's something greater, something beyond. Whether you call that the monad, Brahman, or nirvana, the message is the same: the material world, with all its suffering, is the product of a lesser, imperfect force. And true freedom lies in transcending it. So, where does that leave us? If Yahweh, the God we've been taught to believe is the highest authority, might actually be a demiurge, a lower creator of a flawed, material world, then we need to reconsider everything. The universe isn't as black and white as we've been led to believe. There's more to the story, layers of truth and deception that stretch back to the very beginning of existence. This is the untold story of creation, one that challenges our deepest beliefs and invites us to look beyond the material world to discover the true nature of the universe. The demiurge, Yahweh, the flawed creation, they're all part of a larger, cosmic puzzle. And the key to solving that puzzle? It's knowledge. The same forbidden knowledge that's been kept from humanity since the dawn of time. Thank you for watching, and if you made it this far, we really appreciate you being part of this journey. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. And as always, God bless us all.